Here with this week's episode of Fearless Flight Live. Oh, this is Capt again this week with Fearless Flight Live, and that was our impromptu robot that remind us that we're recording. With me again, of course, are Dieter and Eric, and Diane is a little bit under the weather from working so hard, I think, but we'll wish her well and hope she comes back next week. This is our weekly show where we come together for you and people who amongst you who might be afraid to fly, people out there who might know somebody who's afraid to fly. That's also very common, and people who just like to talk about airplanes and the aviation industry a little bit, which is a passion of ours. Obviously, we have our Birds of a Feather group. We burst through 800 and we're on our way to 900, and it gets faster and faster thanks to you all. We really appreciate that. And if you haven't joined yet, please feel free to do that. And when you join, jump on there and let us know a little bit about yourself, and feel free to jump in and both give and receive support to other people out there. Okay, and once again, we are in the caller in mode, and we decided, the three of us decided before we're just going to sit here for as long as we can and not say a word until somebody calls in. So we don't want to put any pressure on you, but no, we won't do that. We'll fill the air a little bit, but we would love to hear from those of you out there. It's just a more personal, a little more intimate. It's like the coaching calls when I do it. It's much better to be talking to the person, and especially with Zoom and all that. So we're going to talk a little bit just about the things that come up in coaching. When I do that with folks, a little bit generically about fear of flying, the way I start the 15-minute calls. And Eric's going to say just a little bit about the is it CFA? What's the name of that?
I get it wrong every time I have to look at it. It's craft, Civil Reserve Aviation Fleet.
Yeah, it's what they did when they enlist the airline's support for military operations. So they did that, and I assume that they were just using the Air Force's C-17s in and out of Kabul down to Qatar. Is it? Yeah. And then
Yes.
And then from there that's where the airliners were operating out of. So anyway, so let's just talk a little bit. Let's just talk about fear of flying. Okay, what is it? You know, you all would have me believe that it's something outside of you. And so we'll talk about anxiety, and it doesn't reside outside of you, it resides inside of you. And so the problem is really an attention disorder, because once your attention gets hijacked by the amygdala, your smoke detector, whatever you want to call the mechanism within you, your survival instinct, it triggers biology, which is your brain's way of grabbing your attention. And how does it do that? It gives you sweaty palms. It gets you sweaty soles on your feet. It sometimes causes your heart to palpitate. Sometimes you get some people get upset stomach, and most often people's blood pressure goes up, and that's not as obvious.
Blood pressure, Ron. I think we have a caller. Should we risk it?
Yeah, bring him on. Hey, it's Neil from Chapel Hill. It says here.
North
Hey,
Carolina.
Neil. You're on the air with the crew. Maybe.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Hey, great. If you were here, I'd give you a $5 bill. It is Neil, correct?
No, it's Gilbert.
Well, it was a good guess.
Oh, it's Gilbert. Okay.
Well,
All
Neil
right.
was my last name, so.
Yeah, got it. Got it.
Gilbert.
Yeah.
Yeah. So awesome. Hey, Gilbert. Great to actually have you, hear your voice, because I know you're usually in the chat. So thanks for jumping in there with the courage and being our caller today.
Yeah, frankly, we're tired of listening to us. So what do you got going for us?
Well, as you may or may not know, I'm planning a trip to Moscow next year around springtime.
Cool.
And I have been talking to someone actually about this who has some experience in this. And you, Captain Ron, mentioned something about during our session about the fact that a lot of people who have fear of flying tended to come from broken houses, broken households and stuff. You remember that?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Not right off the top, but yeah, it can be an example of kind of traumatic stress of living in a dysfunctional house, a dysfunctional family.
Right. And the thing is that I've realized that what I'm feeling when I'm on a flight is not claustrophobia, and it's not fear of turbulence or anything like that. What it is
Sure.
is a loss of control. I have total
Right.
no control at all. And the first time I flew, it was the first time in my life that I ever felt a total loss of control.
Yeah.
And that sent me into panic. And so I feel like now that I know what the enemy is, maybe I can address it a little bit better.
Well, that's well
Yeah.
put. That's well put. And let's just play with that for a bit. So in my family, from the outside, typically, looks like a Midwestern, little mom and my dad and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that they were villains or anything, but they didn't have a whole lot of skills. And I'm grateful that I had an opportunity to do some counseling in my life, and it became so interesting that I went on and got my master's degree. But what happens is, as a child, and every one of us as children interpret. You can have 3 kids in the family, and everyone will interpret the same event differently, right? So, but the one thing that is kind of can be common, as you touched on, Gilbert, is if there is, if there's a problem or there's conflict and it seems unresolved, or you don't see the resolution, that's another problem. Mom and dad sometimes argue, and then they solve the issue outside of the view of the children, so you never get to see the resolution. You just get to see the conflict. And so if you just imagine, like I'm imagining right now, that is kind of the definition of feeling out of control, right? You're 6 years old, you're 10 years old, you're 15 years old. It really doesn't matter, except the way your brain processes it, because all along the way, our brains are developing. So to have strife or conflict in a family when you're 6 years old is different. It's probably going to be differently interpreted than when you're 10 or 12 years old. So without exposing everything to the world here, maybe you could just verbalize for us, if that maybe approximates some of the feelings you had growing up.
It does. I grew up in a single parent household, and they had problems with a certain chemical, and
oh yeah, so you have a substance abuse. Okay,
right. And so I lived constructing my own reality, and not I wasn't homeless or anything like that, but I was making my own boundaries and making my own dynamics and stuff like that, and it was all things that I could control because I was in control of them. It wasn't like we had to sit around the dinner table. It wasn't like we had to go to church. It was just free for all until we aged out, basically.
Right.
So when my first airplane ride came, that was like the first time where I just I have no control. I mean, I couldn't get off. I couldn't tell the pilot to address, how I felt. And that's the thing I think that faces me every single time I'm on an airplane, but I didn't know it. I thought it was claustrophobia. I thought it was a number of things, but I'm starting to realize that it just has to do with when I was a kid, I constructed my own reality, and now when I'm on an airplane, I can't do that. I can't pretend I'm somewhere else. I'm on an airplane, and the doors are closed, and I'm going. So I have to. That's the thing I have to deal with. And a question.
Well,
I don't think it's.
Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's the thing. Now I know the kind of the monster that I'm dealing with. And I think it's going to inform my choices going forward as far as how to make this happen, because I'm, as frightened as I am of this, I'm also, more stubborn than I am frightened.
Sure.
So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna do it. It's just that it might be a horrible experience, if I don't find the tools to do it. So that's the epiphany that I had sort of these last couple months, weeks.
That's really terrific insight. And insight isn't necessarily to get over fear of flying, but it sure helps most people. Because it kind of helps direct your your healing process there. So, when you were a kid, basically that worked, right? I mean, all the things that you conjured up in your mind led you to a way of coping, right? Unless I miss the boat here. Yeah. So you cope with that. So it's no surprise to me that when you get in a new situation, namely an airplane, and first of all, the circumstances are completely different. And you realize quickly that you have none of the control that you had before. So it makes perfect sense to me that why you would feel out of control and look for that. And if you were going to want to make a comment there just a minute ago.
No, I was just going to say that, when the time comes and when it gets closer and I'm talking to you more about the coaching and stuff, I feel that this is something that I was just going to say that a lot of people who are afraid of flying maybe can examine that aspect of their childhood, of not feeling like they had any sort of structure. And so they make up their own structure because we're humans. We do that.
Yeah, we do.
Even cavemen.
That is so well stated, Gilbert. That's really awesome. I'm sure Ron will send you a check. That's really, that's amazing. But you can't, and I see what you mean. You can't invent a reality to match the reality of the airplane when you're in it.
That's right.
So if you want to, Gilbert, let's just show some people what coaching might look like for them, okay? Because I think a lot of people, wonder what the heck that could do for you. But so when you, as you think about preparing for this trip, what's just one thing that comes up in your mind? A trigger of some sort.
Well, I mean, like one thing that comes to my mind is like business class as opposed to coach, and maybe feeling like that space would allow me to maybe forego that the confines, but I really don't think that that's going to work.
Okay, so let me make sure it was a little muffled here. I think what you said was you're considering getting a first class ticket instead of coach to give you a little more room.
Yeah. That's
okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you got the money, I always joke with people, everything's always better in first class. It really is. You're up in front, you get to board early and all that. You know how to board early now, but because of all the times we've talked about that, you tell them that you have a medical condition and you need extra time boarding. But let's talk about that. And I'll give you a parallel. I had a young man a couple of weeks ago, and he was getting married, and we were talking about his fear of flying because 2 days after the wedding, they were headed for Hawaii. So he's thinking, okay, that's the problem. And he said, I'm not really bothered by the safety of the airplane and all that. What bothers me is I have this restricted feeling. And he said, and it's not even aggravated by the smaller size of the airplane. He says, as a matter of fact, he was imagining standing up there. It was going to be an extended ceremony in a church, and he was worried when he gets nervous, he sometimes has to use the facilities. And he said, I'm freaking out that I'm going to be standing there thinking about the fact that I need to go to the bathroom. And so I said, okay, so let's work with that. So I said, can you imagine being up in front of the crowd, however many people are there, and you feel this overwhelming urge that you need to make a nature call, and all you do is you raise your hand, excuse me, folks, I'll be right back, And he said, I could never do that. I said, sure you could. You know, I mean, it's just a problem that happens in life. And we think about how people judge us and all that. And I said, it'll be a great story on your 50th anniversary with all your kids and grandkids sitting around you, talking about your wedding day when you had to do that. And by the end of the, and so then we talked about how that happens in the airplane, and yours is a perfect example. When you feel, one of the manifestations of some people who feel out of control is the sensation that when they're in the airplane and they close the door, that I'm somehow restricted. Some people can't even get out of the seat because they don't feel like they have the freedom to do that when the seatbelt sign is off. Some people, it's just constantly do that. So as we continue to converse about this fellow, I said, so just imagine that you're going to give yourself permission to leave the wedding, go relieve yourself, and then come back. And just in the course of that call, he got what I'll say is insight. And, it's like when I tell people to call me and I give them my cell phone number, they say, oh my gosh, that, I could never do that. I said, why not? And the reality is I have more people tell me that just having the number, knowing that they could call me if they needed to, was like having a Xanax in reserve, right? So if you can just get to the point where you can just think about, okay, so give me a thought, if you will, you're whatever is appropriate for you. But let's say you're on the airplane and you're sitting in coach, okay? And when you got to your seat, would you have a thought about, would something remind you of your feeling confined?
No, maybe the fact that the ceiling is so close to me, maybe those little circular air things,
the eyeball vents overhead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe
right.
Those being so close.
Okay, so I don't want to manufacture thoughts, but what I'm trying to get at is, through the power of your mind, how long has it been since you've flown? When's the last time you flew, Gilbert?
Last time was like 5 years ago. I flew to Philadelphia from here.
Okay, and was that a fair, good, excellent experience? What kind of experience was it?
The flight was not bad. The trip itself was a horrible thing, but I don't want to go into detail about that.
That's okay. So just an overriding, you just have an overriding feeling that it was not fun, and so that makes it harder to do the next one, right? So now that's the thing that's looming there. So again, just in general terms, I'm going to show you something that a technique that you can do, and this is one of the things I do in coaching. So do you have a pen or something to write with there in front of you?
Hang on a second.
Okay, take your time.
You killed him.
I know.
You killed him.
Yeah, I do now.
Oh, he's got a pen. All
Okay,
right.
cool. It doesn't matter where you write or anything. I just want you to sign your name. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And when you're done with that, put the pen in the other hand and sign your name. Again. Right. Usually gives a chuckle, right? Because it's not something you do all the time, right?
This is true.
Okay. How's it working out?
Well, it looks like I imagine Stevie Wonder would have signed it. So
okay. Well, I don't know. I've never seen Stevie Wonder's signature, but even Stevie has a pretty good signature. So here's the deal. All right. So let's talk just about handwriting. When I said, hey, get a piece of paper and something to write with, Gilbert, and I want you to write your name, did you say, I wonder which hand I'm going to use today?
No, I didn't.
No. Why not? Why did you pick the right one?
Well, I picked the left one because that's the one I was.
You're left-handed, so you're one of the few people in your right mind, so to speak, as they say. All right, so you're left-handed. Okay, so why did you pick your left hand?
Well, I sort of didn't. I mean, that's the way I've always written.
Right, you were unaware of it because it's because it's become automatic. No, you didn't. You don't have conscious choice. But was there a time in your life when you made a choice? Absolutely. Okay. And just for the record, it typically happens around the age of 3 or so. We start getting motor skills and independence and all that. And it doesn't matter when or which hand, but when we picked one hand over the other, in your case, your left hand, you stuck with it, right? And so you practiced it every day. And so when you were writing your name with your left hand, you could even carry on a conversation with me. But when I said, switch hands and do it again. Now, one thing we literally do, or you literally did, is with your left hand, your motor control over your left hand comes from your right hemisphere of your brain, right? So when you switch to your non-preferred hand, your right hand, you literally called upon your brain in a different way. And not only did you call upon it and for something new, but it took a lot more focus and a lot more attention, right?
That's true. Yes.
Okay. And so, but writing is something that ultimately becomes automatic. So how many times do you think you've had a negative thought about your last flight 5 years ago?
The flight, none. The trip, lots. But the flight, not really.
Well, what I'm saying is, you're not looking. Generally speaking, the issue is you're not looking forward in the biggest way to make this flight. You're going to will yourself into it, which I totally support, right? But you've got. If you don't have thoughts, some people don't even have conscious thoughts. Like I hate this. What it's going on, all that, or they're not aware of them. But you definitely have biology going on, right? Something happens and out of nowhere, your attention gets hijacked and you're on that flight to Moscow, right? Or you're getting ready to get on the flight to Moscow. Is that fair? I don't want to talk you into anything, but is that fair?
That's fair, yes.
Yeah. And how many times a day, as you get closer to the flight, do you think that you have some kind of a thought process that you go through without you even calling it into action? It just, bam, it's right there. How many times a day do you think that happens when you start to get close to the flight, or whenever you start to notice it more?
Do you mean anxiety, or do you mean?
Yeah, whatever it is. It can be one of 1,000 things, Gilbert. And that's the hard part, and that's what coaching is all about. So I'm just trying to get you to think about something that you don't think about, but it is happening. Okay. You didn't think all the times that you were writing your name and writing with your left hand over the years, you didn't have to think about that, did you? It was all happening below the surface. So if I make a parallel between anxious thinking and thinking about, this competence and the thinking that I have automatically writing with my preferred hand, they're very much the same. And we call it rehearsal. So how many times a day do you unconsciously, more than likely, could be conscious, but more than likely unconscious, how many times a day, a week, a month, or in general, before you make that flight to Moscow, how many times will you rehearse those negative thoughts?
To be honest, I really don't. Rehearse the negative thoughts.
So tell me how your fear of flying is impacted. Tell me. I'm missing the picture here, and this is great. Okay, because I'm learning. So tell me how your fear of flying manifests in you. What is it? What does it look like when you're afraid to fly?
I don't fear the airport. I don't fear the ride on the way. I've never feared any of those things. But when I sit down, it starts to hit me, and like a lot of people have said, it's embarrassing because I don't want to confess that.
Okay. All right. So now we're getting closer. Okay. So you get embarrassed. Okay. But and what is it that embarrasses you?
The fact that I don't feel like a normal person, like I should be calm and quiet and happy.
Okay. So we'll hold off on the should be. Wait, okay. So you say you don't feel like a normal person. Is that what embarrasses you? Or is it the thought if somebody next to you knew that about you?
I'm afraid that I'm going to stand up and start like
Now we're
yelling to get-
talking. Now we're talking. How many times do you worry about standing up and calling unwanted attention to yourself about your fear of flying?
Only when I'm on the chair. Only when I'm in the seat.
Only when you're in the seat.
I don't
And how
do it.
long? How many times in the seat? Your flight to? Where are you flying out of in your trip to Moscow? What's the itinerary?
I'm going to. I think we're going to fly out of Washington to France and then to Moscow.
Okay, so 3 legs. Okay, and probably a total of maybe 10 hours, something like that, on the way to Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so 10 hours. So what I think you're telling me is you only get anxiety when you're sitting in the airplane, worried about jumping up and calling unwanted attention to yourself related to your anxiety about flying.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay. And let's just say it only happens when you're physically in the airplane. And we've decided that it's going to be about 10 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
How many times do you think in 10 hours you would rehearse those thoughts? Oh, geez, I hope, I'm not feeling good. I hope I don't get up and make a fool out of myself.
Probably about 4 or 5 times.
Okay, so it's misleading though, because one time can last you for a half hour, right?
True. Yeah, that's true.
Okay,
Right.
so it's not, I don't want to imply that it's just the number of times that it happens. What I'm talking about, and see if this kind of pulls it together, it's a process that you go through in your mind. And it's totally unique to you. You're the one that has this specific concern about people noticing or becoming aware, and I don't know, you haven't said this, but some people are worried that not only will it draw unwanted attention, but it'll be adverse and it will result in some kind of reprimand or some kind of of restriction with them personally. Worst case, you get taken off in tough cuffs, right? Okay, I don't know to what extent that you think about that, but is that am I on the right track? It's not just about people knowing that of you, it's about you embarrassing yourself at the very least, and at the most, maybe getting unwanted attention. People don't understand what's going on with you, and so they confront you with that. Is that true or is it not true?
It's more an existential thing.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more. Tell me more about what's that like for you.
It's like hearing really, really bad news and there's no way to stop it.
Okay.
Like if you hear that, if you hear that you're going to have an arm amputated or something, that's what it feels like to me. It's like inescapable. And the fact that it's inescapable makes it even more so. Sort of like growing up in a family with a substance abusing parent, and you couldn't change the outcome. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. I was powerless.
So
that's right.
Right. So when I say how many times have you rehearsed that, it's not always about the specific fears that you have about flying. What you're rehearsing is that angst and that dread that you learned how to manufacture when you were growing up. Maybe. I'm not telling you. I'm just inviting you to take a look at that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
And an airplane is a natural place to do what we call transfer fears or anxiety from one setting in our life to another. Why? Because you don't have any control over what goes on in much of your flight. You certainly don't have any control over the physical control of the flight. You don't have any control about getting up in turbulence. Literally, I mean, you're not supposed to and all that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. It's definitely something to think about. Definitely.
And again, I don't want to project.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to project onto you the whole scenario. But I'm looking at my own life. Okay. My mom would have times when she wouldn't talk to me. It was very unnerving. I was the firstborn, the oldest in the family. And, and that goes all the way back to like 5 and 6 years old when I first began to remember that and put it in my memory. And it was painful because she looked to me like she was in pain. And I just didn't like the fact that I couldn't help her with anything, let alone I couldn't improve my own situation, in the house. And so again, you're not me, but when I'm in different situations throughout life that are totally unrelated to those experiences that I had growing up, they trigger the same neuron pathways up there. So it's not, again, I say the pain in your brain is not about the plane. When I talk to people who are afraid to fly, it's not about the plane. That's just the trigger. And the trigger is something that activates your amygdala. Okay. And if we had more time, I would take it further with you. And I would give you some more things that you can do with your non-preferred hand. Okay. Because what you've got to do is you've got to first come to grips with the fact that those feelings and that's, I think you represent a lot of people. It's the hardest thing for some people to recognize is, hey, Ron, I don't have those thoughts. I'm not thinking about the things that you're alluding to. Okay. It's more for people. It's just that overwhelming dread. You said like the thought of getting your arm cut off, right? That doesn't require much cognitive feeling. You could almost feel what it would like if somebody whacked your arm off, right? Or had some other physical experience. Yeah. And interestingly enough, the same part of the brain that would measure and register pain if you lost an arm is the same part of your brain that registers emotional pain. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah. I did.
They put people in fMRI scanners and they create painful situations, and they watch them when they have emotionally painful situations. Same parts of the brain light up. That's why this is such a pain for most people. Literally, it is an emotional pain. A broken heart or broken trust, all of those things represent the same kind of challenges to us as human beings. So, hey, I want to thank you for opening yourself up in front of a lot of other people out here. That's really what it's like. Sure. That's what coaching is like, and I hope that it helps you with even just the smallest insight about the fact that when you get triggered, it's not about it has nothing to do with the current specific situation that you're in. That just triggers a part of your brain that's been hanging on to that and said, at all costs, Neil, Gilbert, make sure that we don't encounter this situation again. Okay. And the coping mechanisms that you develop as a child, think about it. A 6-year-old is so much more limited in what you can do than as an adult, right? As an adult, if you could ultimately leave the situation with the parent that's not functioning at a high level, right? You can leave that situation, but not as a child. You're stuck. You're trapped. Wow, there's that word again. Trapped. That's what anxiety disorders are all about. And fear flying just happens to be a very convenient place for it to get transferred to. Okay?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Feel free. I'm sorry?
I said, we'll talk more when the flight is happening, and I'll always tune into your show. So thank you so much for taking the time.
I love it. Thanks. And thanks again. Thanks for being vulnerable like that. So anyway, and I hope this has helped some of you out there. Dieter, or anybody comment on that? Say, get him off the air, or talking about me or anything, or?
No. Let me just come back here to the. So there's a couple things going on. Obviously, Gilbert's courage inspired others to kind of share a little bit more deeply about, I think Don said it the best. It's and he doesn't want to go too deep, but it's underneath. There's a fear of our own mortality, right? And even the people that we encounter in Fearless Flight, and Eric, you can maybe talk to that. Well, I'm not worried about the airplane at all, right?
Right.
Ultimately you got to ask yourself, well, what's worrying you then? What about this experience has you so worked up then? And it's interesting because Diane has been around airports forever and helping people, and in the last 2 years on flights, wow, it seems like she really was working hard. But she never had somebody really jump up and kind of like lose it, so to speak, right there in front of everyone. And yet that unprocessed anxiety, as Gilbert was pointing out, it accumulates, but as long as it's conscious, it gets attached to other things constantly. It's just fear of flying. We don't fly so much, so unless you fly, you don't really feel it, right? But it plays out sideways in other areas of our lives all the time. So
and we have two groups of people, two groups of fears. We call them mechanical and emotional. And the mechanical ones, we refer more to people who have concerns about the actual airplane, something were going wrong with the flight, the pilots, or anything like that. The other group, emotional, are the ones more related to what Gilbert has represented here, and that is just fear of being afraid. I mean, that's the essence of what he's describing, like so many people. And Gilbert, feel free to jump in again if you have a comment about that. But the thing is, it's not about the airplane. And it happens, I've shared with many of you out there, that I was molested by my paternal grandmother. I didn't even know it till I was in my 40s, but it happened when I was a toddler, apparently. And so so that was before I was verbal, before I could even associate thoughts and form a story in my mind. So I would get triggered by events throughout my life. And that's the way that I got validation for that, is looking at things that I remembered that otherwise wouldn't be memorable. And so, that happens to everybody. And that's why I say we may not all suffer from full-blown PTSD, but we've all suffered from post-traumatic stress. And what's stressful to one person may not make any sense to another person. It's so personal. So looking at a child go through an experience, we can't even imagine what it's like for some. And, that's why in the same family, as I alluded, I had two brothers and sisters at that time in my life, and we all process that differently. Mainly when you're young like that, your cognitive development is changing rapidly as you grow up. So anyway, again, I'd like to thank you again, Gilbert, for reaching out.
Sure.
That it takes what you did there is probably going to serve you better than anything else you could do getting ready to fly to Moscow. That's courage. That's why I do this work. That's why I'm so inspired by people like you. And I can't thank you enough for doing that. So with that, if we don't have any other specific questions out there, I'll thank you.
I want Eric to confess. Eric, what do you get nervous when you get on an airplane? And then we're talking about flying, not sitting in the back. So, because I just saw a message from Kenneth, and he says, I get nervous right before I get on a plane, and he knows everything's going to be okay, but he still gets nervous. And for those who haven't heard, Eric, what do you get nervous about before you get on an airplane?
Well, even before, Eric, if he can say, what are you nervous about? Okay. So what I hear you say is I get really nervous, but it's not related to the airplane. So work on that as Eric responds here.
That's kind of broad. It's not I don't like a surprise, but is he looking to me? Is the question like, what should he do about that part, that aspect of it?
I think what I really want to demonstrate through your answer is the fact that you are very accomplished, have lots of years of flying, and yet I know that when you step on an airplane, to pilot it, there are still other things you get nervous about, right? They just don't happen to have anything to do with whether or not you're gonna have a good flight or not. But there are things.
Oh, sure. We've been working for an hour or an hour and a half before we get on. So we might have been stressed over getting a weather package that we wanted, or if we got all of our flight plan and all of our data correct, or if we want more fuel or to go a different route, we might have got on the phone and got an argument with the dispatcher about, why did you do this? We want to go over here. Can you refile us, or do you want us to take care of it in the air, or some route change that we want to do? And ultimately we have the trump card on that. But if it isn't all smooth and clean the way we wanted, then we're always under time pressure, knowing what time we have to go. So if these things come up, if it's a mechanical item, but it's minor, and an operative item that we have to look at, a route change, more gas, weather changing rapidly, then all of that still has to be dealt with in that time constraint with a clock ticking down towards where we're going to push back. So we're not nervous, but we're moving to make sure that on time is not when we get there, that we get off on time. Otherwise, they'll have to have a pretty good excuse for it.
Got a question for you, Eric. Eric, got a question.
Sure.
Okay, last week or the week before, I was off diddling I think I was trying to call somebody or get our guest on the air. And you and Dieter shared experiences. You shared experience about Deb, correct? About what you guys have been going through?
I did.
Okay,
yeah.
So forget about the flying. We know that you do flying with your hands tied behind you and blindfolded, okay? The reason you don't get anxious, God help us, we don't want people out there thinking you get anxious routinely flying an airplane. That's not what it's about. But when you and I had the class and you shared, I think, with the people that were on the show that week, you shared about what that was like for you, right?
Right.
What was the out of control part about that?
I was having, if not a panic attack on the way home, realized that I'd been around an unvaccinated, unmasked person in fairly close proximity, and I'm extremely paranoid about not bringing that home to my wife, who has enough challenges fighting ovarian cancer, and I was very freaked out that I had done that. And I could drive.
So it was an out of control feeling, right?
Yeah, it was not good at all.
That's what Gilbert's talking about. That's, I think, what's relevant to the person that asked you, is like, okay, when do you guys get it? Well, it's not flying that gets us, I have anxiety, but it's not about flying airplanes generally.
And Gilbert did a good job this week, because 2 weeks ago, I can't resist dragging you through the dirt on it. We were warming up, and you mentioned one of our friends who you thought had passed away.
Yeah.
Who was one of my really good friends at work. So I texted one of our buddies with very few social skills. I can't tell you his name, but his initials might be Dennis. So Dennis calls him up, and we immediately get text from my friend that said he's not dead, and he was unhappy with Ron for saying so at a public meeting. So now I was sweating bullets that while Dieter was scrolling phone numbers, I'm looking at these things and thought, oh man, if Ralph calls in and starts yelling at Ron because he's not dead, this will go off the rails. And legitimately, you had a 50% chance. He could have either been dead or not dead. Right. He hasn't called in yet. So that's good.
And that's what I apparently have been doing lately. I'll think of people like, geez, did I hear that he was dead? I just met with one of my best friends from all the way through grade school and high school, and graduated with him this afternoon. And we were joking about that, because it seemed like every time I turned around, we were reminiscing about different people. And I said, and one of us would say, gee, are they still alive or something like that? I said, apparently that's what we do when we get old. And I told him this story. So yeah. All right. So I want to put this together. So what do we do tonight? Well, we got a really brave soul named Gilbert to call in and go through it and just show how complicated it is for him. And it's complicated for a lot of you. And that's why when I ask people, when they've called me for a 15-minute phone call, I ask them, what bothers you? What are your triggers? And then I say, what's your plan? And they say, what plan? What do I do? Because most people are gonna go forward, and they're either going to get on the airplane and stay on it, or they're going to get off. Okay. Or they're going to cancel some point before that. Okay. If you do nothing, the old adage is if you keep doing the same thing over and over, you're probably going to get the same results. And we're not here to beat any of you up. We're here to help you go through a process, just like I was trying to do with Gilbert, and find out. And he's the one that came up with it. He says, apparently I didn't even remember it, but when I talked about the relations that we have when we're little, we're growing up in the family, absolutely. What we learn in our families, we go out and practice. And when we practice it, it has consequences. And so that's what fear of flying and anxiety disorders are all about. That it's from being triggered at some point in your life and then replicating the circumstances. And even though they may be in an airplane and you had nothing to do with an airplane when you first were exposed to that, it sticks, and it sticks up here in that part of the brain called the amygdala. And you got to dig in there, and you got to figure out how to dig it out and get some insights as to what you can do to change that. You don't need to be afraid to fly. Your anxiety is not going to disappear by the time you go on your next flight, but you're going to, if you work on it, you're going to be able to put a lid on that anxiety so that you don't have to worry about a panic attack. That's the first step for many of you, is to convince yourself that you have tools, strategies, and techniques that are going to keep you from having a panic attack. Okay? I've talked way too much probably, but you can tell this is a passion with me, and it's a passion with Eric, and it's a passion with Dieter, and we're here for you all. And I'd love some feedback on tonight. I know I talked a lot, and we had a guest that talked a lot, but we know the whole thing of social connection is, some people, like in group therapy, you go into a group sometimes and you don't get what you thought you wanted, but you get what you need. And so that's why this can be valuable, listening to someone else tell their story, find yourself in that story, and hopefully get some insight. So thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks, Dieter. Thanks, Eric. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Fearless Flight Live. Thanks a lot, you guys.
And thanks, Gilbert, for blocking our dead buddy in case he tried to call in.
There you go. All right. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.